Okay, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد. Okay. Then we are going to read, inshallah, اللي هو Unit 5 now, the reading passage. The title of this unit is The Ancient Olympic Games. So we are going to read about Olympic Games. وهاي الأولمبيك Games اللي هي started in Greece, right? في اليونان. We will read about its history. So we are going to read history in a way. Yes. Before we start, you have to look at the pictures here. What can you see in the picture? And I want to ask this question. What do you know about Olympic Games, about ancient Olympic Games and new Olympic Games or modern Olympic Games? So Olympic Games, we will, thank you. So origins to the Greeks, it was important to root the Olympic Games in mythology. During the time of the ancient games, their origins were attributed to the gods, and competing legends persisted as to who actually was responsible for the game's genesis. These legends have become nearly impossible to untangle. Yet a chronology and patterns have arisen that help people understand the story behind the games. So, Olympic Games دائما بربطوها بالمythology. We say mythology, that means شوي religion and so on. So mythology. During the times of the ancient games, speaking of the gods of Greek, just like Zeus and Genesis. The legends, or these legends, have become nearly impossible to untangle. Yet a chronology and patterns have arisen that help people understand the story behind the games. Then people should understand the story by referring to what? To mythology. The next paragraph says, the earliest myths regarding the origin of the games are recounted by the Greek historian Pausanias. According to the story, Heracles and two of his brothers raced at Olympia. Olympia is just like a place. حسب الأسطورة أو المyth of earliest myth, Heracles and two of his brothers raced at Olympia. He crowned the victor with a laurel wreath, which explains the traditional prize given to Olympic champions. The other Olympian gods would also engage in wrestling, jumping, and running contests. ونشوف هاي الألعاب أو these games اللي في ألعاب very old, and we have like new games. هاي المyth الأولى, the first myth. Second myth, another myth claims the festival of Olympia involved Pelops, king of Olympia, and Heracles, the son of Zeus. The story goes that after completing his labors, after finishing his work, Heracles established an athletic festival to honor his father. Then Heracles, he wants to honor his father. He respected his father. He appreciated his father much. Pelops, using trickery and the help of Poseidon, who won a chariot race against a local king and claimed the king's daughter, Hippodamia, as his prize. This is the second myth. A final myth is dated at 776 BC. For the same reason, games of previous millennia were discontinued and then revived at the behest of Oracle of Delphi, who claimed that the people had strayed from the gods, which had caused a plague and constant war. Historians of the games would end the plague, usher in a time of peace, and signal a return to a more traditional lifestyle. And this is another myth. The patterns that emerge from these myths are that myth, when I say myth, what does myth mean? So myth means something is hard to believe. It is so close to the word legend, myth, that it was very common, or they were very common in Greek mythology. Greek mythology, that means unbelievable things. Things are very hard to believe. Are that the Greeks believed the games had their roots in religion, that athletic competition was tied to worship of the gods, and the revival of the ancient games was intended to bring peace, harmony, and return to the origins of Greek life. Okay. So the Greek life, حياة اليونان كانت full of myths. وانعكست على ايش؟ على ancient اللي هو the title. Ancient means very old, right? So we are talking about the ancient Olympic Games, the origin of these games. وين اجت هاي الجيمز اللي لحد الآن they are run regularly. Okay, let's move to history. The games started in Olympia, Greece. Then the games started where? In Olympia, a place in Greece, in a sanctuary site for the Greek deities near the towns of Elis and Pisa. The first games began as an annual foot race of young women in competition for the position of the priestess of the goddess Hera, and the second race was instituted for a consort for the priestess who would participate in the religious traditions as the temple. This is for the history. Okay? And the Hera Games, the first recorded competition for women in the Olympic Stadium, were held as early as the 6th century. Then it's very old. The history of these games is very old. Speaking of the 6th century BC, before Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. Being the consort of Hera in classical Greek mythology, Zeus was the father of the deities in the pantheon of that era. The sanctuary of Zeus is Olympia, housed a 13-meter high, 43 feet statue in ivory and gold of Zeus that had been sculpted by Phidias is about 445 BC. This statue was one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world. Then هذا الستاتue of ivory and gold, ivory, which means something very precious that I take from elephants, اللي هو العاج, and gold of Zeus. هذا اللي يرجع تاريخه about 445 BC. هذا statue was one of the world's wonders, right? One of the ancient 7 wonders of the world. By the time of the classical Greek culture in the 5th and 4th centuries BC, the games were restricted to male participants. Even only male were supposed to participate in the games, not women, only male, only men were engaged in these games. The only competition held then was the stadion race, a race over about 190 meters, 620 foot, measured after the feet of Heracles. The word stadium is derived from this foot race. وين اجت كلمة stadium from stadium race. The Olympic Games were part of the Panhellenic Games, four separate games held at 2 or 4 year intervals, but arranged so that there was at least one set of games every year. Culture. And let's move to culture. We talked about origins, and then we moved to history, and now we are discussing culture. The ancient Olympic Games, as much as religious festival as an athletic event. It is more like religious العلاقة بالدين, more than what? More than حدث رياضي, ولكنه what? Religious festival as an athletic event. The games were held in honor of the Greek god Zeus. And on the middle day of the games, 100 oxen would be sacrificed to him. Over time, Olympia, site of the games, became a central spot for the worship of Zeus, and a temple built by the Greek architect Libon was erected on the mountain top. And speaking of Zeus, one of the great gods of Greece. The last paragraph, كمان speaking of culture, artistic expression was a major part of the games. Sculptors, poets, and other artisans would come to the games to display their works in what became an artistic competition. Sculptors, they came and they create just like statues or other precious things by stone and by other things. Created works like Marion, a discus thrower. Their aim was to highlight natural human movement and the shape of muscles and the body. Poets would be commissioned to write poems. يجوا الpoets كمان نحكي بالculture. Poets are the one who write beautiful things, rhymed things, سميهم poets, would be commissioned to write poems to honor of the Olympic victors. These poems, known as epensions, were passed on from generation to generation, and many of them have lasted far longer than any other honor made for the same purpose. كثير كان مشهور الشعر. فالشعر هون by poems we in a way move culture, or we transfer culture by poems. Baron Beret de Coubertin, one of the founders of the modern Olympic Games, wanted to fully imitate the ancient Olympics in every way. Included in his vision was to feature an artistic competition modeled on the ancient Olympics and held every 4 years. Modeled on the ancient Olympics and held every 4 years, during the celebration of the Olympic Games, his desire came to fruition at the Olympics held in Athens in 1896. إذن هنا هو حكى لي, he talked about origins. When we say origins, يعني من وين, from where this idea of Olympic Games come from? من وين جت هاي الidea? It was created from what? From the Greek mythology. The gods of Zeus, and they are competing for the history of the games. When did this kind of games start? نحكي عن the 4th to 5th century. And the last thing we talked about, which is culture, and in this part we talked about how poets, sculptors and other artists express the beauty of these games and how do they celebrate this religious festival, not as an athletic one but as a religious one. This is all what we have, and I will inshallah include a short video for the words, not just the ideas. Thank you for listening.